Federalism, the idea that 50 states compete to provide the best government at the lowest cost, is the friend of taxpayers. And we're seeing this with the movement to phase out state income taxes. Already, California and New York, they've stopped tax increases on the top rates because competition.
Welcome back to FreedomFest TV, part of the Ultimate Summit for Liberty. I'm your host, Heather Wagenhals, and joining me is one of my favorite funny tax guys, Grover Norquist.
Good to be with you.
Welcome back to the show.
Yeah.
It's so good to have you. So, Americans from Tax Reform is your big project, and we've got a lot to talk about. We think in terms of and focus on what's going on in Washington, but as we know, and I know from personal experience, my homeowners association locally regulates me more than anything else. And so as all politics are local, taxes are local too. Let's talk about what's been changing and what we need to be paying attention to.
Federalism, the idea that 50 states compete to provide the best government at the lowest cost, and they can do different things or not do different things. Federalism is the friend of taxpayers. Federalism is the friend of liberty, because the good news is liberty works and statist policies don't. And so when Vermont voted, as they did once, the Vermont legislature, let's have a single payer plan on healthcare, government monopoly, like Canada. They passed it. It was going so poorly, they repealed it. So we were hoping for Vermont to melt down in front of everybody. They repealed it before they got a chance to do that.
Like, oh yeah, this wasn't such a good idea.
But what it does tell you is the same people who realize that if you do it in one state, you'll look bad, are willing to do it at the national level. So what we want is more decisions made at the state level, or frankly at the individual level. But to start with, at the state level, and we're seeing this with the movement to phase out state income taxes. 7 states have no state income tax. Florida famously, Texas, Tennessee, Alaska, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nevada, and New Hampshire in a year and a half will be the 8th. And then there are 12 other states looking to go to 0. Arizona was at 4.5 top rate. They've moved to a single rate, flat rate tax of 2.5, and then they're going down. This Iowa is going from a top rate of 8.6 to a single rate of 3.99 and then to 0. Our friends in Nebraska, they're not going to 3.99, they're going to 3.9 to be under Iowa. All those big spenders in Iowa come to Nebraska, don't go to Iowa. In North Carolina, they're phasing down and then all the way to 0. South Carolina's announced that that's their plan as well. Some of them have just started it, some are underway for some time. West Virginia and Kentucky have voted to phase down to 0. And the way they do it is they say, look, we're going to spend this much. So they put a spending limit up. When revenue pokes up above that spending limit, the teachers union get to steal some of it, but the rest of it goes into lower income taxes. And so the government doesn't keep getting bigger. The income tax gets phased down as the economy grows. So instead of taking additional revenue because the economy grows and spending it, you cut taxes to leave it in the hands of people, and you do that over 10, 15 years, you don't need the income tax anymore. Most states can phase it out over a period like that. California might take them longer, but other states can do it faster. When we moved Arizona from 4.5 to 2.5, we thought it would take 3 years, it took 1. A stronger economy moves it forward. So that's what's happening state by state. Imagine in about 15 years, there'll be not 7 states with no income tax, but 20.
Right.
And there'll be another 5 right behind them. So now if you're New York or California, at the top rate, 13.5, 10 in Minnesota. 10 versus 5 is one thing, 10 versus 0 is another. And if people can move 200 miles to be a no income tax state instead of having to go all the way to Florida or Texas, I think you'll see very powerful pressures on the blue states to not raise their taxes. Already, California and New York the governor said, don't do that tax increase you were thinking about. They've stopped tax increases on the top rates because competition. And now with school choice, we have about 14, 15 states that allow pretty broad school choice. And Florida, every child can get $8,000 to go to homeschool or charter school or a private school or parochial school or to the school down the street. So when you move to Florida, they say, okay, how many kids you got? 4? Well, we'll give them each $8,000 if they want to go to something other than the public school, the government-run school, and we won't have an income tax. How many more families move into a state that has both school choice for the quality of education, for the help on the cost of education, and no income tax? And then there are many other smaller issues, not always smaller to other people, but that also augment liberty in the same states that have no income tax and now have school choice. So that
It's becoming a no-brainer.
Yes. And that'll eventually go national, because you can't have a country with failure over here and success over here.
It's amazing because this is good news.
It's very good news. It doesn't get on national TV.
I know. This is, we should be shouting this from the rooftops,
Yeah.
and we're not hearing this. We're just doom and gloom and taxes. Yeah. But this is very, very refreshing.
I would add many states have passed a law, like Arizona's. They did it first. Arizona does a lot of stuff first.
Yes.
They did the first.
I'm a native. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So the school choice education savings accounts for everybody, not just for handicapped or poor kids, but everybody, first done in Arizona. And then everybody looks at that and goes, we could do that. And they also passed a law that said if you have a license to be a hairdresser or do fingernails or paint or whatever they license many too many things, you can come to our state and your license is good in our state. You don't have to do some retraining or.
Governor Ducey did an amazing job at repealing a lot of that nonsense.
And they're getting rid of many of their own regulations that they don't need. But if the ones they still have, and you come in, you don't have to jump through hoops to get your license. There are quite a number of states, some were between 13 and 15 and 30, depending on how you count them, that largely lets you transfer it from one to the other.
Yes, and the reciprocity is huge because, I've seen people like, I already paid, $8,000, $10,000 to go to this technical school to earn this, and now I have to do it all over again, or I have to do more? Like, what more am I going to learn?
You're not.
I've been practicing for 15 years. I just want to come and live in a cool state.
Yeah.
So, yes, we're very, very fortunate for that. So you have all kind of stuff. You've got books coming up, but let's talk briefly about the most recent book.
Well, the most recent book is End the IRS Before It Ends Us, and us being U.S.
Right.
And what it is actually is the history of taxation in the United States from when we were fighting the British or before we were fighting the British to now, how different taxes came in, how we've had success in rolling it back at various times, where there have been times when we've been losing, and with some good history, with then some lessons about, so now what we might do. And certainly the state federalism is a big part of that. At the national level, we just need to keep getting those rates down so that we're competitive nationally. The Republican tax cut of 2017, top rate in the US was 35, corporate rate was 35 before 2017. China was at 25. France was at 25. Most of Europe's in the 20s. We were at 35. We were not competitive with the rest of the world. We then went down to 21. And frankly, we wanted to go to 15, but we got to 21. We need to keep pushing that down because 70% of what the corporate income tax comes out of the pockets of workers who get paid less. Because since about 70% of what a company spends is on workers, they have to build a building, they have plant and equipment, you have to buy steel to make a car, but about 70% or more is wages. So when somebody says, we're the government, we take $1 million, well, you have $1 million less. How are you going to downsize?
Right.
700,000 of that's coming out of pay. Maybe you fire people or you just don't give the pay increases that you plan to. So the corporate income tax needs to go down as much as possible. The only reason it's any good is it's good for politicians to hide who's paying the tax. And that's not our interest. That's the politician's interest. So I wish to take it to zero because it's a hidden tax.
And it's one that we don't really know about. So I'm curious, I wonder what kind of an event or a conference you could go to where people would be receptive to those types of ideas.
Well, the good news is all the business community gets that the corporate income tax hurts consumers and employees. But they think if they give a speech about it, people, oh, that's just you. So it's very important that taxpayer groups and others point out that the corporate income tax is paid by consumers and workers, not by General Motors. There is no Mr. General Motors. There is no General Motors. It's a piece of paper saying this is General Motors.
Right.
The flesh and blood are workers and consumers.
Right.
That's who gets taxed.
And people forget that. I remember when, they did the protests on Wall Street, and I'm like, but you have a 401k, right? Like, corporations are built of people.
Yes.
Without the people, there is no corporation. And so you're anti, like, the people you say you're trying to help. This doesn't make sense.
About 60% of Americans own shares of stock through a 401k or an IRA or a defined contribution pension. So if you make companies poorer, you make the American people poorer. And this is what Biden has done. We've actually seen people's life savings decline because of his policies. Mm-hmm. And we say unemployment number, we say inflation number. We need to be reminding people of what these policies do to people's life savings. They've been very, very destructive. And of course, every year we ask all elected officials to sign the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, to vote against any and all tax increases. So about 90% of the Republicans in the House and Senate have signed and kept the pledge, and 2/3 of Republican governors have signed the pledge, and about 1,000 state legislators. So politician says, vote for me, say, if you're running for the state legislature, have you promised to vote against any tax increase? If you're a governor, do you promise to veto any tax increase? If you're a congressman or a Senate candidate, are you willing to put in writing to the American people that you will vote against any tax increase? And that's been very successful in stopping tax hikes.
Right, and I love that you guys have that.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful resource, and it really helps armed citizenry, because how do we go about it? If we don't know what we don't know, then we can't make a difference. And then once we do know, we may still not have the resources to do it. It's so great that Americans for Tax Reform helps us navigate those waters with those pledges.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you
It's been wonderful what you've been able to do, because accountability is everything.
Before the pledge became something that all Republicans took, there was a 62-year period from 1932 to 1994, 62 years. The Republicans held Congress for 4 years, 2 sessions of 62 years. We had a one-party state in Washington. But in 94 is when 96% of Republicans made the commitment in writing to not raise your taxes ever for any reason. Since then, the Republicans have held Congress half the time. So they went from being a non-player in politics to being not dominant, but competitive,
for sure,
solely on the tax issue.
That's a wonderful thing. That change that you've been able to affect, you should be very proud of.
Thank you very much.
We're very grateful for your work. So you'll be back to FreedomFest next year then, I'm assuming.
Absolutely, I will. I come just about every year.
What's your favorite thing?
All the wonderful people, and that there are so many things going on at once, so many different, freedom has many aspects. A free person can decide to go to church all day, work it all day, count your money all day, fondle your firearms all day. Whatever is important to you is the freedom they may focus on. But of course, some people go to church and have jobs and have guns. So some people have, many kinds of freedom that they're interested in. And I just think the various ways that people are talking about expanding liberty, defending liberty, because when we get it right, the world gets it right. And when we don't get it right, the world goes to Hades. So getting it right here helps everybody.
Well, thank you so much for your contribution toward liberty and freedom. And if folks want to learn more about what you're doing, what website can they go to?
Sure. Website is atr.org, Americans for Tax Reform, atr.org. We'll have the list of pledge takers there, and atr.org/IRS visits. We're compiling all the horror stories of the IRS knocking on people's doors and lying to them and bullying them.
Yes, scintillating nighttime reading.
Yes.
Thanks again, everyone. Grover Norquist here. I'm Heather Wagenhals, and we'll be back with more FreedomFest TV right after this.